It is a sad day today, with there being Dan Heng nerfs and some Evernight changes. Hello everyone, it's me, you, and yeah, version 3 is out, so let's talk about it. Starting with Peter. Dan Heng prior to version 3 was honestly a T0 character because of what his dragon provided, but now he's probably hovering around tier 0.5 or even near tier 1. So let's see what these changes were and why I believe this is the case. Now, the biggest change is to the follow-up attack mechanic provided by Dan Heng's ult. Prior to version 3, this attack in particular counted as the ally's follow-up attack. This meant that it counted as them attacking, which allowed for things like tutorial Lightcone to get procced or even implanting a debuff from Acheron's Lightcone. But by far the most impactful thing were certain interactions like Welt, Hook, or even Serval, which the dragon could proc their talent, which would result in a big damage increase. But now, they've changed it so it's Dan Heng dealing 80% of his attack to the enemy, with there being an additional damage proc of 80% of the ally's attack to the enemies. Because additional damage is not considered an attack, it can't proc anything. So yeah, my previous videos list with all the cool stuff that could be done, completely worthless now. Sure, we get another 80% motion value, but we lose all of the cool interactions. Moving on, his shield values did get nerfed, with the most important thing being the skill, as that's what it all scales off of. Now, we're going from 30% to 20% attack, and 80 less base attack, which is roughly 33% less scaling. Now, practically speaking, prior to version 3, we were expecting around a 4600 shield without the signature and 6000 with, but now we're getting roughly 4000 without and 5.1 thousand with. This actually isn't bad at all, but it's because of the artifact rework. The self-enshrouded recluse prior to this gave a skill point refund near the start of a wave, and also gave the wearer crit damage. But now, he gives a shield bonus and a crit damage buff to allies with the wearer shield. Yeah, it's pretty cool, and it's now all of our shielders' best in slot relic. Now, while the max shield is still really strong, the refresh from the ult and talent got drastically cut, and makes them really similar to Adventure now, where the skill shield is very strong, and the other means of getting a shield isn't too big. This change of course is a nerf and will make you more conscious when playing them, as prior to this, you realistically were not dying. Moving on, Dan Heng's old Trace 3 was moved into his Trace 2, with parts of his E2 becoming his new Trace 3. Here, the enhanced Dragon Soul will deal another 40% attack to the enemy with the highest HP. I will cover the damage changes when talking about his E2. Speaking of Eidolons, they also got some changes. E1 got 3 more rest band. Now for E2, as you know, it had the additional damage moved into the base kit. For the new addition, the follow-up dragon shield is now double, which is, I don't know, good if you need more sustain. Looking at the overall damage changes, we can see that in a single and AoE scenario, version 3 comes out on top. Now when including the E2 changes in a single target scenario, damage-wise, it's really similar, but when we move into AoE, that 80% multiplier added to the base kit actually increases its damage by a lot. E4, on the other hand, is now pretty useless and has to be one of the worst limited Eidolons in the game.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit that I have ever heard.
That defense shred, however, was moved into his E6. And yeah, that's all of Peter's changes. Overall, I'm honestly a bit sad that they removed the cool synergies that he had with everyone. I understand if that's not supposed to be his niche, but like it could have been, you know? He was someone who had a lot of potential, but as of now, he's just a shielder that gives some buffs and additional multipliers. Now, he isn't weak by any means, but he doesn't really provide anything special in my eyes though. I want to note, with version 3 usually being the main changes, I do believe this is also a sign that Dan Heng is not the perfect sustain find I was hoping for. Perhaps version 4 or 5 will change that, but we'll just have to see. Moving on to Evernight, it seems that the devs are wanting to shift the direction of her overall kit, making her provide less nubud for casters, but instead gaining more personal damage and team-wide buffs to compensate. Some other changes in her kit make her a bit more reliant on external factors, so let's see why that's the case. Starting with Evernight's talent, we can see that the max HP of Evie was cut to 50% from 100. This of course would mean cutting her damage in half. But when we look at Evie's normal and enhanced skill, we can see that the multiplier was increased by slightly more than double. Now, when you total up the numbers, both the normal skill and enhanced skill, where all the damage is coming from, they got a 25% damage increase, which is of course great. These changes were clearly targeted towards Castris, limiting how much Newbud Eevee could provide. Now, when she disappears, instead of generating around 29% Newbud with a 10k HP Evernight, it's now around 14%. This change also pushes you to run HP Orb instead to generate more charge. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame in terms of Castris charge, but again, we do get a Evernight damage increase to compensate. Following suit, all of the Memo Sprite talents also got some changes. The first has it so when Eevee uses their normal skill, it does not drain 1% of its HP anymore. This change will reduce the Memoria gain from this attack and also hurts the synergy between Hyacinth, as this attack won't be able to proc Ika anymore. After that, summoning Eevee also now no longer heals Evernight by 20%. For most players, it's probably not too impactful, but for Castris, this is losing out on around 6% Newbud, which again sucks a little. As for the final Memo Sprite skill, we have changed the action advance to instead a speed buff, which is increased with each memorial consumed when Eevee disappears via its enhanced skill. This change, while attempting to be a side grade, makes her kit a bit more clunky in my opinion. Generally speaking, when you have action advance, whether you gain it early or late, it still will be the same value. However, when you gain speed at different times, depending on how much is left on the action value, you may not get the full benefit. Now, this of course isn't the biggest deal, but just something to know. However, that energy loss is pretty important. 30 energy is no joke, especially when she has a ult cost of 240. This was, however, alleviated by Evernight's Trace 2, where she now gains 5 energy every time she or an ally Memo Sprite acts. Assuming you are using a Remembrance team with say Castris and Hyacinth, you should be getting similar amounts of energy. But yeah, this change really incentivizes you to put her on a mono Remembrance team. Also, the Lightcone got changed. Now, can you guess why I'm bringing it up? Well, if you answered energy, then you're spot on. In regards to Evernight's Lightcone, she now gains 8 energy when Eevee disappears, whilst losing out on 18 damage percent. Pretty good trade-off in my opinion, but of course, kinda pushing you towards getting her Lightcone, as if Remembrance wasn't doing that enough. Next up is her skill and Trace 3, each getting a buff with more crit damage for Memo Sprites. The Trace 3 is of course more situational, but assuming you are using 3 or 4 Remembrance characters, it will be a nice little buff. The 2% HP loss from the skill shouldn't really impact Castris' Newbud generation, but again, something to know. Moving to her ult, its multiplier did get increased, but because of the HP nerf to Eevee, this actually is a slight damage decrease, 16.6% to be exact. But this isn't the end of the world, as Evernight's damage will be mostly coming from the enhanced skill. There's one more change as you could see, which is that additional 4% vulnerability. With Castris, Tribby, and Hyacinth doing a lot of damage, losing a bit of personal damage for a team-wide amp is definitely a plus. The last notable change is to her Trace 1, which now gives 5 more crit rate, and her E6, which refunds slightly more Memoria. Not much else to say. So, as of now, I do think Evernight is in a solid spot. Not only is she providing more for her team as a sub DPS and pseudo support, she can now also better function as the main DPS of her own team. For Castris, while we do lose out on charge, we are getting a lot in return. So overall, version 3 is kind of a mixed bag. Dan Heng lost a lot of the unique synergy that made him so interesting, and while he's still a strong shielder with some extra damage, he just doesn't have that special sauce anymore in my opinion. For Dan Heng, it's definitely a nerf, but for March, I would say it's a slight upgrade or a pretty good one depending on who you are. But yeah, that's the video. Pretty short and sweet this time around. I'd love to hear what y'all think about the changes, cause again, me personally, I'm not a fan of Dan Heng's. I will say I'm surprised March's early Eidolons stayed alive because damn, are they really strong. As for channel stuff, I may or may not skip out on version 4 or 5, it'll just depend because I have other videos I want to make. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and peace!